Dad was an only child born when his parents were nearly 40, and they raised him in an area of West Oakland crammed full of poor Irish. His own father was a dancing on tables sort of drunk. One evening he danced right off a table, collapsed onto the floor, sending my grandmother into panicked early labor. Dad was tiny and not expected to make it. He did. Everyone prayed. He was Catholic to the bone in spite of constant swearing, often taking the Lord's name in surprisingly creative ways. I can still hear him saying, "Holy bitch, tits, fucking virgin." And in spite of his itinerant habit of taking off and leaving us for weeks at a stretch while he pursued a solitude that was lost to him once his 5 children were born. After his funeral mass, I didn't set foot in church for a decade. But as much as I subsumed myself in secular and clearly illegal activities with too many sulky, disaffected men and boys, somehow I was always being pulled back to prayer. When I was in the whoa, that's a sensitive mic. When I was in the back of a car being driven by a very drunk guy and we slammed into a tree, the first words out of my mouth were, "Oh God, please don't." I walked away with a sprained hand, and my boyfriend at the time laughed about this holy interjection for months. During a mushroom trip in another boyfriend's apartment, a corona of flames flickered around his head, and I mumbled, "The Holy Spirit set you on fire, dude." I developed a habit of crossing myself whenever I saw a cat or dog crossed in the road. All the guys I've dated have been atheists, and needless to say, they found these holy inclinations annoying. But for me, there's something irresistibly sexy about non-believers, since it requires such high self-esteem to reject the idea of God altogether. Sartre once said that if God existed, he couldn't, and if he existed, God couldn't. If confidence is sex, Sartre must have been the George Clooney of philosophy. Maybe it's just in my genes. Or there's a scientist here. Vesicular monoamine transporter. Does that sound right, Matt?
Sure.
Okay. Vesicular monoamine transporter 2 is a protein found in every human body. In some people, it results in a greater sense of what a psychiatrist named Robert Cloninger refers to as self-transcendence, a willingness to believe in things that can't be objectively proven. A geneticist named Dean Hamer links this to heredity. If one or both of your parents believe in God, it's more likely you'll believe in God too. When I read about this so-called God gene, a bell went off inside my skull. Maybe this tendency to fall into contemplative states, pondering the nature of creation, was something I inherited and not the result of too many bowling hits. Maybe there really was a God. Maybe I occasionally snuck into Catholic Mass because my genes wanted me to go. Or maybe it was just another way of being different. After all, my generation has the highest percentage of self-identified and atheists and agnostics in recent history. Or maybe just in spite of my politics, which just became more progressive the older I got, the Catholic Church just felt like my spiritual home. I'm just going to skip a little bit. Over the years, I've wondered if, rather than rejoining a troubling institution, I ought to look for a church closer to my political beliefs, like the Episcopalians or the United Church of Christ, both of which not only have female priests, but support gay people as well. But there's a root problem. I'm Irish, and when you're an Irish Catholic, some part of you is always going to be Catholic. It's the God gene, but it's also the narrative I was brought up with, the story that we were part of an oppressed minority that came to America fleeing oppression and found more oppression. There's something appealing about the idea that my ancestors were not tea-sipping Episcopalian wasps, but Baroque as hell, ghetto-dwelling, hard-swearing, garbage truck driving, potato famine escaping, gallon of whiskey drinking, short lifespan living Irish Catholics. Yes, the Irish Catholic Church has even more ills to answer to than the American one, but it's also part of my culture. When I pray, I know generations of my family who came before me prayed the very same way. So, I've never read that section out loud before, and I actually kind of like it now. When I was in Seattle, I met a wonderful writer named Rebecca Brown, and she introduced me, and she read that section, and I was like, wow, Rebecca reads that really well. I think I'll try to do it too. So I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit. So I don't know how much Oh yeah, one person, okay. Oh yeah, so he's like up and down, back and forth. Okay, so we have this thing called Lent. I don't know if you've heard of it, if you're not religious, but you're supposed to give something up for 40 days. And when I decided to start going to church again, I didn't try to be an orthodox, follow all the rules Catholic. I just couldn't ever do that. But I did try to give something up, and so I decided that I was going to try to give up swearing and reading gossip blogs. It was just, it didn't go very well. Let's just put it that way. Blasphemy is a constant habit. It's nearly impossible to break. My automatic exclamation, I'm in the children's section, so... Again, I'm always in the children's section. I came here for a reading. My friend Owen read here, and he has this passage in his book about people all getting hard-ons at the same time. And this little girl was walking up the middle. My automatic exclamation on stubbing a toe, tripping over a cat, or slamming a car door on my hand is "God damn it," or "Christ," or "Jesus fucking Christ." I heard streams of this kind of language coming from my father's mouth throughout my childhood and watched him in church every Sunday, and there never seemed to be a schism between the language and his stoic, deep faith. And I meet lots of Catholics who swear like crazy, including a priest who says shit 3 times in one short conversation, and a nun who politely tells me to stop bitching. Blasphemy really means talking badly about God, and when I say God damn it, I'm not really addressing that statement to God, but to the broken toe, throbbing thumb, chipped nail polish. Jesus didn't put the cat in front of me to trip over, so when I say Christ, it's not that different from banana or turtle, it's just a word. But Lent is the time of year when you're supposed to work on this kind of thing, so I developed this habit of apologizing to the ceiling whenever I drop a blasphemy bomb. Jesus doesn't live in the ceiling, but he might be in my hair, so apologies are frequently delivered. And I had a joke in there about the ceiling cat, and my editor made me take it out. You know what that is, right? Hilarious, right? But my editor said people wouldn't know what it meant. It's like, come on. Anyway, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit again. So basically, I tried to give up swearing. It wasn't going very well. And then, of course, what happens during Lent is you're supposed to look into yourself and kind of clean everything up. And the problem was that I just didn't understand what it meant to go to hell, because that had never really been explained to me. So it's another concept that causes a lot of confusion for non-Catholics. It's probably Dante's fault that most people think of hell as a place ruled by a cartoon devil, like the ones on the cans of chopped ham we ate on childhood camping trips. Most people imagine Satan busily poking agonized sinners in the butt with pitchforks while their feet roast over flames. For English majors, Milton was the one who created our image of Satan. He depicted him as a handsome, muscular guy. In the famous Doré engraving of the Miltonian Lucifer, he's dead sexy. Washboard abs, flowing curls, temptation personified. We don't really get into hell or Satan in catechism classes, but the internet actually helps me to get a better grip on the ideas of sin and hell. And I don't get it from a gossip blog because I'm not reading those. Excuse me. Stephen Colbert, as most people know, is Catholic, and his is probably the only talk show with occasional appearances by resident chaplain, the priest James Martin. Some years ago, Colbert had as guest a professor who'd written a book about Lucifer and our modern concept of hell. The professor, who had a rather Luciferian goatee, was making a windy argument that Catholics see hell as the Dante-esque place where you get hot pokers up your bum for all eternity, when Colbert interrupted him and said, "That's not how Catholics see hell. Catholics think heaven means being close to God, so hell means being separated from God." "Oh," replied the professor, "you sound like you went to Sunday school." Colbert leaned back and replied, "I teach Sunday school, motherfucker." I watched this clip on YouTube dozens of times before Holy Week. It just makes sense. If sin means doing something that feels like it's offensive to God, then hell means the desolation when you turn your back on God. So sin is really a way of getting people to treat one another better. If you recognize things you're doing that are inherently selfish or cruel, that better odds are of not continuing to do them. And theoretically, this eventually draws you closer to God.